Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Indiana Black Expo Minority Small Business Series presented by KeyBank. Today's topic is the legalities of starting your own business. My name is Denise Hurd, and I am the founder and president of Hurd Strategies. And we are a full service public relations firm headquartered in downtown Indianapolis. And I'll be your host for this afternoon's session. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors, KeyBank, AT&T, Carrier, Cummins, Delta Faucet, the Indianapolis Airport Authority, One America, Visit Indy, Indianapolis Power and Light, and Eli Lilly and Company. Also, series partners are the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, the Indiana Small Business Development Center, the Indy Chamber, the Indianapolis Recorder, Engaging Solutions, Indiana Department of Workforce Development, the City of Indianapolis, the Indiana Department of Transportation, the Indiana Department of Administration, and the State of Indiana. Before we start, I have just a few housekeeping rules for you. First of all, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many as we possibly can before our session ends. Also, toward the end of the session, there will be a link to take a session survey that will be located in the chat box. We ask you to fill out that survey to assist us in planning future webinars. The panelists for today's session are Rose James of Global Trademark Counsel Managing, the Cummins Global Trademark Portfolio, Richard L. Rowley, Esquire of R.L. Rowley and Associates, LLC, Norma Boyd, Commercial Insurance Account Executive for McGowan Insurance Group, and Francine Bond, owner of Francine Bond Insurance Agency. So let's get things going with our first panelist, who I had an opportunity to meet and get a sneak preview into some beautiful artwork in her home. But it's so nice to see you. So nice to see you this morning, Rose. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, Denise. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to share a little bit about intellectual property and those considerations. Before we start, I want to thanks Alice and Marsh and my co-panelists. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with them. So with that, I think we can begin my presentation. I am going to speak to you today. Just going to move I'm seeing a screen, I'm going to move it over. I'm going to speak to you today about the intellectual property considerations with when you want to start your own business. And I must say that this topic is near and dear to my heart because one of the favorite parts of my career so far has been when I've had the opportunity to mentor and guide entrepreneurs and small business owners. So, and these questions always sort of come up of what do I, what's the intellectual property that I need. So my agenda, in the agenda I will be talking about, I will have a business hypothetical to sort of orient us of what we're talking about, to give us a scenario. I will explain what is intellectual property from a high level, and we'll look at our business hypothetical and say, what are the types of intellectual property that we would need to start the business? And how do we acquire and protect that intellectual property? Before I begin, you could go to the next slide, please, Marsh. Before I begin, I need to let you know that the opinion expressed here is mine and not the official position of Cummins, Inc. But they are, I am here appearing on behalf of Cummins as well. So let's get into this business hypothetical. So I should also note that this is an actual business idea that someone has, so it's not up for grabs. So it is a hypothetical because I'm not giving the name of the business, but this is a concept that is in existence. So for our business hypothetical, we have a mobile app. So we want to do something for sustainability and protection of the environment. And so we think, oh, what the way to do so is to develop an app for residents to use in their home to help them identify their refuse, to say, what is recyclable? I have a can, I have paper, I have all of these things. I do not know what's recyclable. And with the app, they will be able to scan their refuse and the app will use algorithm and sensors and machine learning to detect what is a recyclable, and it'll categorize it for the user to tell them what receptacle that, what recycle bin that this should go into. The app owner also would like to partner with municipalities to record so that you get sort of credit by your county to that you are recycling, and potentially if there is an opportunity to get tax deductions for it and to accumulate points for how often you do it. Next slide, please. Further, the app owner, the business owner, would like to partner with the retail stores and corporations that support recycling efforts, and that would allow the app users to get prizes and rewards for recycling. So perhaps like if you recycle a certain percentage over a month or so, you can get a gift card, or you can get discounts or merchandise and stuff like that. And finally, the app owner would, well, 2 more points. They would like to distribute it on the regular platforms, the smartphone platforms, Apple, Android, Windows, all of those. And the plan is to have a free subscription for the first 6 months to get people to get to use the app, and then have it be paid monthly or annually going after. And our business owner has also come up with the idea that they would like to call this app Eco-Friend. So next slide, please. So with having set up this facts, so we know what our business owner is looking for, let's find out what they need to know about intellectual property. What is intellectual property? Well, intellectual property is really an intangible right. It is a legal right that protects inventions. Sort of, I have on the screen engineering drawings, symbols, publications, information, in any form or medium that it may be. And I also have that the puzzle sort of to show that they all fit together. And we'll go into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. And what is not intellectual property? Intellectual property is not physical property. So if I'm holding an iPhone in my hand, the iPhone itself is physical property. That's not intellectual property. What's inside of my iPhone, all of the content and the workings, that is intellectual property. It's intangible rights to that is what we're talking about. Intellectual property can be licensed to others for a temporary time or specific, for specific use. It can be transferred, it can be assigned, it can be purchased, just like personal property, just like the iPhone can be transferred. Intellectual property can do the same. And the types of intellectual property we're talking about is patents. We'll go into that, go about inventions, trademarks. Those are the names of the and logos. Copyrights, those are things written or song, music, that kind of thing. And trade secrets, information that you want to be protected from disclosure. Let's go next slide, please. And so just high level, so orient us of what are we talking about? So patents, what are patents? Patents are an exclusive right, a monopoly granted by a government body to exclude others. It doesn't give you a right to make. So if I have a patent to develop to the software on this iPhone, I do not ever have to actually create the iPhone or the software inside. I just have the right to prevent others from making, selling, using or selling my invention. We have the right to enforce it throughout the territory where we get the, that has provided the right, and here we will focus on the United States, and the governmental body is the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And so the rights are imported, so it also prevents someone from importing your invention without your approval into the territories. And it is a limited right. It's only given for 20 years. It's a monopoly for a specific time. Next slide, please. The other kind of IP, these are criterias for what is patentable. We're not going into this here. I have it on the slides. If anyone have questions later, we could refer to them. This is for you to ask for your lawyer to let you know whether what you have discovered or your invention related to your business is something that's patentable. But this would be the analysis that your patent lawyer would make. Next slide, please. And one of the things I wanted to point out, though, is that patents fall into certain categories. We have utilities. That means what is the method of how something is made, or an apparatus of the actual thing. We have design patents, which are the non-ornamental design aspect. So perhaps the shape of this iPhone, if it is ornamental and it doesn't have functionality, that can be also a patent. So for one example is the Coca-Cola bottle, the traditional one. That one is trade dress and a patent. So plain patents, we don't have to go into that, but just wanted you to know what is not patentable. So if it's a physical phenomenon, a mathematical equation, a law of nature, these things are not patentable. Next slide, please. And another type of IP, so we've talked about patents, now we're talking about copyright. This goes to the actual, we'll say maybe brochure, the content, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the copyright is also an exclusive right, and it's a monopoly. It will give the owner 6 exclusive rights here, and that's the main point I wanted to make. It is that you get the exclusive right to copy, to distribute, to display publicly, to perform publicly, and to create derivative works, and if it's a sound recording, to perform it publicly as well. Next slide. These are just examples of what is copyright, what is copyrightable subject matter. So we have literary works, and software, which is what we're going to talk about in our hypothetical, is a literary work under the Copyright Act in the United States. So we have musical works, dramatic works, pictures, movies, sound recordings, software. Next slide, please. This is just a point to be made, the distinction between a copyright and a patent. A copyright does not protect ideas, procedures, methods, and whatever. Those are things that are protected by the first type of intellectual property we talked about, which was patents. And when you think about the legal definition for a copyright, it is an original work of authorship that is fixed in a tangible medium. And one example how we have a fixture in the tangible medium is that if I have an idea and I said, oh, I have this idea to create this app and it will do such and such, and I never create the app, what is protectable is my app that I created, not the idea that I had to create the app. So that's the point to be made here. If you're a small business, you just need to understand what is protectable and what isn't. Next slide, please. An important things for new business owners is to know about trademarks. Your trademark is any word, phrase, symbol, design, logos that identifies and distinguishes the source of origin of goods and services. So when we see the some of the examples like Google and the M for McDonald's or Coca-Cola, when you see those symbols, those logos, you know right away, you know what the source of it, you know, oh, Google is a company that's a search company and they do all this stuff. Coca-Cola is an international company, but I know the soft drink. So it automatically tells the public the source. What we want to do with your trademark for your small business is that when someone sees the mark, they associate it with your business and what your products or services. Next slide, please. And this is something your attorney that you would hire to do your trademark search would need to know. There are certain marks. If you're starting off, it could be that you inherit a trademark that someone else may have used, and it can be a famous mark. But it's important to know that some marks are so well known that they are famous and they get the protection for those kind of marks are much broad and stronger than others. And I just had some examples. It's something to consider when you are deciding upon what you will call your business or your product or service. Next slide, please. And what is the value of a trademark? Well, what a trademark provides, it allows you to distinguish your goods and services from others, from competitors. That's the main thing. It associates the goodwill of your product. So when someone sees Coca-Cola, they know that, oh, this is a particular soft drink that tastes in this way, and I know a company that does these things. And with registration, you get insurance for your brand against those who would create counterfeits or who would use it without your approval, your consent. Next slide, please. One more thing to consider with trademarks is that it's possible to have common law rights. And what we mean by common law rights is that most of the times you will register your trademark, and people will talk about a registered trademark. That is, you file an application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office and you have a registration. Before you obtain that registration, we have under US common law. And that means by case law, if you are using the mark in commerce, which is the standard for trademarks, if you use the name, whatever it is in commerce, and people are associating it with your product, it's used to distinguish and identify source, then it's protectable. It's just in that geographical location where you're using it, you would have rights, even if you have not registered. That's an important thing to remember as a startup, starting up your business, that you can have rights. Another important thing to know is trade secrets. And that is information that you want to be kept confidential and you do not want it to be disclosed. And trade secrets should have some sort of financial advantage. So it gives you a competitive advantage. It doesn't have to be $1 million. It's just that for the holder of it, there is a competitive advantage for not disclosing it. Next slide, please. And I think that just tells us what the elements of trade secrets are. So it's a secret, meaning it's not known to the public. It's not known to others in your industry. It has value, it has some commercial value to the owner, and it gives you a competitive advantage. And you're required by law to take reasonable measures to maintain its secrecy. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, what measures we have to put in place. So let's go back to our hypothetical. So what are the elements that we have that we need to protect with intellectual property? We have hardware, we have the software, the computer program, we have the sensors, the electronics, what they're doing. We have the content, what is all of this? How do you categorize and all of that information that it has to ingest to do that? And we have the name of an app. So all of these things have intellectual property that we may want to protect. Next slide, please. So what do we need? What do we need to protect? Let's go back to that. The technology. So you'll have the software is in the United States and the world over can be protected by patents as an invention. And so you would want to ensure that you at least have the analysis of, is this something that is protectable? Is it something I should file a patent on? What's also protectable or has intellectual property implication is the content. You want to make sure in this particular app that we want to know what the federal, state, and local laws, what is this on recycling? What are the standards? That needs to be in our app because we're going to use that information to generate a result. We also need to know about tax law. What percentage am I going to get? What do I have to do? All that information needs to be in our app. And do we need, as we're quantifying and categorizing in our machine is, we're going to have machine learning. And so for that machine to get smart, it has to ingest a lot of data. Where are we going to get these sources of data? Going, please. And the last thing is that name, EcoFriend. What should we do about EcoFriend? Can we just go use that? What concerns do we have to be about that? So how do we protect the technology? go to a patent lawyer. The first thing we should do is try to find a lawyer. But I know as a startup and a small business, you may not have funds to do that. So some of the ways is that you can go to law schools. Many law schools have clinics where law students will they have intellectual property clinics, meaning that law students will file your patent applications. They have approval to perform while they're in school these functions on behalf of the school, and it's free of charge if you're able to get into one of those programs. They provide service to the community, and they will review your invention, and they will even file a patent application for you. So that's one resource. Also, the prepaid legal services like LegalZoom, they're less expensive than going to a law firm, and they have very good fees for filing applications and consulting you about your inventions. Or you could look for one of the smaller law firms that have a flat fee service. And this is different from firms that would have, a billable hour where it's an hourly rate that an attorney like myself would have a high billable rate, and that could be costly. But if there's a flat fee, you said, okay, to file your application, it's $1,000. And so there are many law firms that provide those flat fees. So it's important to do that research. And then once you have that, you file a patent application. I just try to give some information about the cost. $300 for a provisional, and a non-provisional is depending on how many claims in that. And it's, let's say, around $2,000 you would have to think of. And these are just the filing fees that, it's something to think about. But when you're a small business entity, under USPTO, you do get a 50% discount filing fee. So those fees would be in half. But it's just information that we should have readily. And then what do we do next? Well, you have to develop a prototype because you want to make sure that this product works. But in developing your prototype, I want to point out to you that the moment you give someone access to your thing, you need to put in place non-disclosure agreement. Remember what we talked about, trade secret. All of this information is not public. It has economic value to it. You want to protect it. So you make sure that whoever you give and share that with, you have a non-disclosure agreement in place that prohibits them from disclosing what they get from you to a third party without your approval. And if your the person who designed a prototype for you will do any sort of work for you, you want to make sure that any contribution by that person they do not gain any intellectual property rights in your product. So you want to make sure you have intellectual property terms that says this is a work for hire. A work for hire means that any IP created by that person will belong to you, and there is no transfer of ownership, and you get to have all the intellectual property associated with your technology. And after that, then one of the things you do is you conduct testing. Again, the same issue comes up with testing. Anyone who's conducting testing for you, please ensure that you have non-disclosure agreement in place, and whatever agreement you use to conduct the testing, a traditional agreement is an evaluation agreement. Please also include work for hire language to make sure that you retain control of the intellectual property and no one gets rights by contributing to your technology. This is some information about the name EcoFriend. What would we do? Well, the first thing you need to know is that you do not go quickly and just start using a name, because as those slides before showed you, there are so many people who already have rights in many of these names. And with famous marks, if your mark is similar to this, confusingly similar, and even if they're not using it in a particular way, because they get broad coverage, they can come after you if you're using a name that is similar to theirs. So the first thing you need to do a analysis. Is this name available for me to use? Well, will my use of this name infringe upon an existing right? And so we do that by doing what we call a knockout search or a clearance search. And your knockout search is you go to the United States Trademark Office. They have a trademark database that includes all of the trademarks that are filed, that are registered, and applications are in there. You can search and say, EcoFriend, let me find, is EcoFriend already used and how is it being used? And you will do that to know whether you can go forward. Once you've decided that, okay, no one is using eco-friendly the way I want to use it, or if anyone's using it in that way, I can overcome it. You want to file a trademark application. And so there's certain things you need to know. What's in a trademark application? You have to have the mark. And in this case, it's a word mark, eco-friend, that just the words we're interested in. We don't have any design, but it could be a design as well. A description of the mark is always required. If it's eco-friend, there's no description because it's just the words. You need a description of your goods and services. We're doing a mobile app that will be doing the censoring for blah, 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 all those things that have to be described in your trademark application. And those are what we consider international class. So for software, international class 9, you don't need to know that, but that's where it would fall under. And the last thing you need to know for your trademark application is the date of first use. Your rights in the United States are based on the date that you first use your trademark in commerce. So that is important. If you have not used it in commerce, you can still file an application, and you have a bona fide intention to use it. And then you get your trademark when you have start actually using it. But the date of first use is important if you have been using eco-friend before you file your application. Next slide, please. And the last thing, on this wanted to share is the cost. Where you're a startup, a small business, you want to know how much will this cost me? Well, the filing fees are relatively small for trademarks. You have an opportunity when you're filing a trademark application to use predetermined description. And for that, if you're going to use a predetermined description, that's already been tried and true, that maybe getting through. It's a $250 per class. If you are going to write your own description, in a lot of the cases, if you're in a unique space, you may want to have to draft your own description, and that would be a bit more costly. That's $320 per class. This is the effective fees starting in January 2021. The USPTO has just increased their fees, their filing fees. They do that a lot. Next slide, please. And the content, I don't know how much time I have, but the main thing to remember here is that we need to acquire content. How do we do that? We probably do so by license agreements. We have to do subscription services to get access to this content that we would need. And the main thing to remember is that if you are, my first point, if you're creating the content yourself, you don't have a lot to be concerned about there with the IP, make sure you own it. If you're getting it from a third source, an outside source, you probably have to get into a license agreement with certain rights and make sure that you have enough rights. This is the key, that the license you're obtaining grants you sufficient rights so that you can redistribute the content through your app. That's important to know, that you haven't gotten less rights than what you need. And thirdly, if you're paying someone to do the content, back to that work for hire, make sure they do not get any rights in your product and your technology.
So,
and these are just some more points. Yes.
Rose, thank you so much. That was really engaging. I'm so sorry to stop you, but we have so much content to get to, and you've got so much rich content to share. So that was amazing. And I hope that everyone through your presentation understands the importance of IP and trademarking. But there was a question that came in the chat that I want you to briefly respond to, if you don't mind. And the question was the difference between provisional and non-provisional.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry I didn't get to it. The provisional is, it's a 1 year, it's sort of like a stopgap measure. If you have, let's say a product, we want to release it. And before you release, you would want to file your patent application just to make sure we are first to file in the United States, well, the world over now. So you want to make sure you file your patent application before you have a launch of your product, of the technology. So you would want, and you have not worked out all the kinks, you don't know everything you're going to do, but you want to, you have enough information to file something as a placeholder. It gives you a priority date. So your provisional is what you would file for your priority date. It gives you 12 months to file your non-provisional, which is your utility patent that will give you your full rights, and where you have to articulate all the claims. There's Patent and Trademark Office is much more lenient with what you say in a provisional, and it's very prescriptive of what you do in a non-provisional.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that good information. And so I want you to sit tight because we're going to come back to you after our other speakers so we can have a roundtable discussion with all of you all, because I know you've got more information to share and we want to glean all we possibly can from you while we have you this afternoon. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'll be
So
here.
so it is my pleasure to now introduce to you our next speaker, who is our next presenter, excuse me, who is Richard Rowley of Richard L. Rowley Esquire. And Richard, and he is of Rowley and Associates LLC. All my words confused. So Richard, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Denise.
So you do a lot of work with small businesses, and so I know that everyone is going to benefit tremendously also from what you have to share. So thank you for joining us this afternoon.
And thanks again, Denise, and thanks IDE and the state of Indiana and all the other supporters and funders. This is an incredible webinar that's been put together today. I hope people are taking lots of notes. And all the information that's given, the information that Rose gave, it was incredible and right on point for all entrepreneurs, whether or not you have a trademark issue or not. The information that she gave you will give you insight as you begin to develop names and items, things to keep in mind of whether or not you need a trademark attorney. And then also the other two that are coming up with Norma and Francine as they deal with the insurance issues. My goal today is to provide a broad brush of information for startups in particular, the issues that you would deal with as a startup, and then as you move into a mid-level business, and then as an established business are sometimes different. So I'm going to focus in particular on startup businesses. As Denise mentioned, my practice deals with businesses and startups, and so I have the privilege of working with entrepreneurs who I really believe are some of the most interesting and risk-taking people on the earth. Because they are the ones that go from the idea stage to, okay, this is something that I've thought about, which a lot of people have wonderful ideas about. Okay, here's a business that I've always thought about. Here's an idea I always thought about. Well, the difference between the entrepreneurs and those that just have really great ideas that they'll knock off of you is the fact that the entrepreneurs have taken that next step of saying, okay, yeah, this is a great idea. Okay, now what do I do? What's my next step? And they've taken that jump into starting their own business. What I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my presentation into a couple of, again, broad brush kind of areas that I believe will be helpful, and I think will help in the attendees in thinking through, okay, here's where I am, and here's where I want to get to. How do I get there? And so, first of all, I would say the first thing to think about that I've seen is who do I get involved in this idea that I have? So you have the idea. You may have knocked it around off of people that you know, or you may have just been chewing it over through the years. So what's your first step that you need to do? And what I suggest, and again, these are suggestions that I have for people because these are things that I've seen implemented by successful entrepreneurs. And so one of the first things that I suggest and that I've seen in those that have succeeded in the startup phase is number one is hiring and talking with the right people to give you professional advice. This isn't just a plug for other attorneys like Rose and myself and other attorneys that are out there, but here's the reason. You need to have an individual that has the expertise in the area that you are interested in. So if you're going into business and you're considering starting a business, you need to make certain that you've set the groundwork to be successful. And there are legal elements, there are legal ramifications to everything that you do in terms of the business. So you should have not just an attorney, but also insurance is going to play an incredible role. And that's what Francine and Norma are going to talk about. But then also, I strongly recommend that you talk to an accountant too, as part of your house of individuals that you're considering as you go through your business. All of these individuals, the accountant, the attorney, the insurance agent, are all individuals that will give you the advice that you need to make certain that you don't have a misstep as you go through the process. But here's the thing, and here's the advice that I give too, is that the main thing for many entrepreneurs is, okay, I may not know an attorney, I may not know an accountant, and they stop there. And so my advice is always, if you have a great idea, keep moving forward. Keep thinking about the idea, keep talking to other folks about the idea, keep moving forward, keep that dream alive, because it's your dream and you're the only one that has the vision for that business. So just because you run into an obstacle, which is inevitable, don't let that obstacle stop you, because you don't know a person that does XYZ. What I've seen in individuals who have been successful is they don't let that fact stop them. They keep moving forward. And in many instances, they will still come across that individual that they were looking for anyway, but they kept moving forward. They didn't just stop at that stage. One of the second things is preparing your supporting documentation, taking those extra steps that you need to go through. There are different, as many of you may know, is that there are different types of businesses. There are different classifications of businesses that you can use for your particular business. It can be, for instance, a sole proprietorship. It can be, here in Indiana, a limited liability company. It can be a limited liability partnership, or it can be a corporation. Are some of the primary categories of types of businesses. And the only reason I go through those is because as you move forward with your idea, is you will at some point need to make the decision of what type of business structure you will need. One of the popular types of classifications is the limited liability company, but that doesn't mean that it's for you. A lot of people just see the LLC or they'll see an Inc. And say, okay, I saw this, I'm starting a business, so I need to be a corporation. Or I saw this, everybody that I know has created the LLC, so I want an LLC. It's not that easy. I mean, you have to walk through and identify the particulars of your business, how you want it structured, the tax ramifications, which is different with each different classification. And so you need to make those kind of decisions as you move forward with your business. Again, I reemphasize, don't stop because, oh my goodness, I don't know what kind of business I want to do. And then many people end up right there and they stay there. that's an obstacle that they hit, and they had this wonderful idea of starting this wonderful business, and then it never goes anywhere because they get caught up in, should I be a corporation? No, maybe I should just be a sole proprietorship. Here's my main point, and I'll reemphasize it throughout the entire process, is to keep moving forward, keep moving that idea forward, even though you may not know the exact type of structure that you may need for your particular business. Second stage, along with that same instance, is if you become a business, and many people take that first step of filing their business at the Secretary of State's office and creating their corporation or creating their limited liability company. The point that I find is that many businesses stop there. They create the business, they go down, they file it at the Secretary of State's office, and that's as far as they go. The next steps, though, involved in the process are the things that typically would appear in your company binder. And what those things are is, if it's an LLC, it would be your articles of organization, or if it's a corporation, it would be your bylaws, and you would need to have minutes. You would need to have, if it's a corporation, you would need to have the stock certificates. And if it's an LLC, you would need to have your unit certificates. And so there are a lot of things that you would need to create after going through that initial stage of saying, okay, I filed it at the Secretary of State's office, I'm done. This is all that I need to do. You have to have minutes. You have to have all these other things that will show legally that you haven't just created this business. Because here's the reason: a lot of people that create their businesses and then go through the formality of filing at the Secretary of State's office is because they want that protection. They want that legal protection of, I want my business to be separate legally and in terms of litigation from my personal finances, from my personal identity. And so in order to do as much as you can to ensure that your business entity, your business as it exists, is separate from you as an individual, you need to go through each of these particular steps. There's still no guarantee if something bad happens and someone sues your company that they would not be able to get to your finances as an individual. But by going through all of these steps is that you will be doing as much as you can to ensure that if something does happen, you can show the court that the business is actually a separate entity. It has a separate bank account. You have minutes. You've done everything that you can to show that it's separate, which will allow you as much as possible to keep someone from being successful if they were to file a lawsuit against the company and not be able to what's called pierce the corporate veil, be able to get through the veil in order to get to your personal finances. One of the other areas too is, and this one pops up fairly regularly, and again, it goes towards what you should do beyond just filing at the Secretary of State's office, is that there are business entity reports that have to be filed periodically too for companies that are filed at the Secretary of State's office. Again, many people file at the Secretary of State's office, create their company, but then fail to file the business entity reports that are due to be filed. If it's an LLC, those are due biannually. So it's due every 2 years. Secretary of State's office does a great job in getting the information out to people. But if you ignore those, lo and behold, you will find that your company that you've worked so hard to create and file at the Secretary of State's office has been administratively dissolved. And so you don't want that to happen. Oh, I see Denise. And so And so the last one is just being inflexible and isolating yourself. Make sure that you continue to talk to people as you create your businesses as it moves forward.
So I wasn't trying to stop you, but you started having some questions in the Q&A. So
Okay.
I thought I would address those with you, if you don't mind, because you gave out such great information. And so someone wanted to know, where can they find a checklist of the items to submit after filing an LLC?
Wonderful. And so, um, unfortunately, there's not a magic website, one website to go through and that says you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason is for the Secretary of State's office, their requirement is simply to file, and their office will have that. The state's website also has a lot of great information on starting a business and all the elements of starting a business to go through. But all of that information together would be helpful for anyone that's looking for gathering as much information as they can.
So what, a couple of places that we may want to direct people towards is probably InBiz.
That's it.
That InBiz
That's it.
is the Secretary of State's website. Another great resource is the SBA. The SBA has a wealth of resources, the Small Business Administration.
That's true.
There are many of us that went to the SBA to get answers to questions just like the one that CJ has asked. So I would recommend the SBA and InBiz as places that you can do some research to get to put together the checklist that's most appropriate for you and for your business. Another question that has come into the Q&A is, do you have a business basics for each type of entity? Weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual things that each type of business needs to do? That's a really good question.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Mhm.
There's no magic time frame for any of those. The business, and if I understand the question correctly, is there a time frame depending on what type of business that you have that you need to consider reviewing your documents or steps to take at each of those intervals? And so the answer is for any of those. So whether you are a sole proprietorship, whether you are an LLC, whether or not you're a corporation, is that you should be on a regular basis, monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually, is sitting down and reviewing your documents, reviewing your business plan, making certain that your business is going in the direction that it needs to go.
That's really great advice. And that goes back to the making sure that you as the business owner are allotting time throughout the course of the calendar year to work on your business and not in your business. And that you stay committed to that time schedule that you put yourself on. And that way you're not racing at the end of the year. Like, so working on your business, when are you going to schedule a quarterly meeting with your attorney or with your accountant or with your banker so you can make sure that everything is in order? That's that working on the business. So dedicate that time, put yourself on a regimented schedule, and then you'll be able to make sure that everything is in line at year's end. So hopefully we've been able to address that. Another question that came into the Q&A is, what if you are just one person at this time?
Okay. And that shouldn't stop you. Many, if not most, businesses that are started are individuals. And so what happens is that the individual has the great idea, that the individual has this vision for the business. And so that simply means that you as the individual will have to make all the decisions. You will have to do all the initial legwork. But you can still either be a sole proprietor, you can still initiate a limited liability company or even a corporation. I mean, you can still and should, would be my advice as an individual, you should still move on. It's great to have other people to come alongside and share your vision and work with you along. But if it's your vision and you see where you want to go with it, you got to move it forward as an individual. Again, most people that come in, it is one person.
Thank you. So thank you for that. Another question that has come into the chat. Can you go over a foreign certificate to do business in Indiana?
Can I go over that?
Mhm.
Okay, so a foreign certificate for business in Indiana is typically when a business has been established in another state, say Illinois, and they've gone through all the formalities of creating the business, whether it's a limited liability company or corporation, they've created it in Illinois, and now they come into Indiana and they want to operate as a company here. And so one of the things that the Secretary of State's office allows is the filing of a foreign company certificate here in Indiana. And that allows that same company that went through all the formalities in Ohio to continue to operate in the same way. And Indiana will recognize all those steps here in Indiana.
Great. So thank you so much, Richard. That was the last question that we had in the chat, but
Okay.
I want you oh, actually, we just had one more come through really quickly. The question is, I am a Legal Shield associate. Is that considered a small business?
So without going into particulars of Legal Shield and how it's structured is I can't say for certain without again going through the particulars of how Legal Shield is set up, whether you are an independent contractor or whether you are an employee. All depends on the structure. It depends on the specific relationship that you have with Legal Shield. So I can't say one way or the other. If you are an independent contractor and you have an independent contractor contract with Legal Shield, then you would be able possibly to set it up. But it all depends on the language that Legal Shield may have. They may not allow it, but it depends on the legalities between you and the larger company.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And keep those questions coming into the chat. We have one more group of speakers coming up, and then we're going to open it up to all of our panelists to address any additional questions that you all have. So keep putting your questions in the Q&A, and we'll keep collecting those and we'll address them after our last round of speakers. But something that's also very important to us as business owners is risk. And being prepared for risk, because it's not an issue. It's not a matter of if you're going to run into a problem, it's when, because it's inevitable. And so proper planning is so important. So here to discuss risk management are Norma Boyd, Commercial Insurance Account Executive for McGowan Insurance Group, and Francine Bond, the owner of Francine Bond Insurance Agency. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, thank you, Denise. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of Francine and myself, we're honored to be here coming behind Rose and Richard and part of this great panel. I want to thank IBE and all the sponsors as well. What a treat it is to be here today. So we wanted to talk about insurance. Sometimes talking about insurance is kind of like watching paint dry, but it's a very necessary thing. And when you're starting a business, it can be so overwhelming and it carries so many costs and responsibilities. Many people think insurance is just a bunch of useless, expensive paper until you have a loss. At that time, it's too late to be contemplating what insurance that you need. As a new business owner, you may not be able to afford all of the coverages that you really need. But the first step is to consult with an agent who really understands your business and can recommend the coverages that should be considered, and thoughtfully put a portfolio together that is both affordable and protective for you. And then you have an idea what to budget for in the future if you can't pick up the coverages today. You also need to decide how risk averse you are and how you want to protect one of your most valuable assets, which is your business, the child that you created. Having said that, we'd like to explore some of the key areas of insurance for business. And if your insurance is in a specialized industry, you may need other ones than what we're talking about today. So next slide. What does insurance do? Someone or something is hurt or damaged or suffers a financial loss. Someone needs to get paid for the hurt or damage or loss and bring them back to the same financial position. Insurance is one way to make that happen, but not everything can be insured. The cost to you to be uninsured or underinsured can be devastating to your business. It might even mean bankruptcy or business bankruptcy. So what types of insurance are there? Think in terms of what could get damaged or hurt, what actions of yours might cause others to get hurt or damaged. Some examples are buildings, things, cars, professions, but bottom line, insurance protects against risk. So let's look at some specifics on types of insurance for your business. I'm going to turn it over to Francine Bond.
Thank you, Norma. One specific type of insurance is property insurance. So what can happen when you have properties? There's different things that can happen for like fire, theft, vandalism, wind, lightning, things like that. But there's other things that can be specifically added to your policy. Items such as sewer backup, flood, earthquake, and there's many, many things that can be covered. But what should you think about covering? Not just your building or the auxiliary buildings. For example, if you have signs, fences, and other items on your property, but think about the stuff that's on the inside of your property. Imagine yourself turning your building upside down. If you shake it and everything that falls out, that's the stuff that you should cover under your business personal property. Your furniture, your computers, even your inventory. So once again, think about those items and also look into other items that your insurance agent presents to you, like business income and business interruption insurance. Next slide, please. General liability. Everybody needs to have general liability. If you don't have general liability, and then in some cases you would carry professional liability, and some cases you would carry both. But Norma will discuss the professional liability later on in the process. But think of general liability as if someone slips and falls on your property, basically, how would they be taken care of? Damages to other people's property that you've caused, how would that be taken care of? Or even if you have a product that you created and someone gets hurt as a result of your product, how would that be taken care of? In other words, lawsuits. So think in terms of lawsuits, but none of us want to think about that. So let's go on. Basically, evaluate your own business yourself. Think of it as the 3 Ps, your property, procedures, and products. Ask yourself, is your property or premises safe for people to come on? Are you taking the proper precautions when you go to other people's property? And is your product safe for people to use? When it comes to the cost, what determines the cost of general liability? General liability, insurance companies look at it as if, what do you do? Where do you do it? How much do you do it, such as sales or payroll? And your experience. They also look at your previous claims and even your insurance longevity history. Norma?
Thank you. My next topic is about auto insurance. This is the next slide, please. Why do you need business auto insurance? You may think I'm driving my own personal car and I've got it insured separately, so why do I need it? Well, and sadly, this picture is a good example of what can happen. Do you own vehicles in the company name? Are people using their own vehicles to conduct business for you? That's a big one. And you think, well, they're covered, right? Well, maybe not. Not everyone is diligent about keeping their personal auto insurance in effect. So what does auto cover? It covers liability, which is damage to someone else's car or injury to the driver or passengers of the other car. It can cover damage to your own car or truck from either a moving accident or from something hitting it or falling on your car when it's not moving, and theft. What does insurance not cover? Deductibles. Make sure you budget for it. Wear and tear is also not covered. And lastly, if you're carrying things inside the vehicle and you're shipping product during doing that, Those items are not covered under auto insurance, and so you need to think of another way to handle that. Also want to talk a little bit about risk management. So who's driving for you? What's their driving history? Do your employees have DUIs or various other things that make you suspect about whether they're a good driver for you or not? Wear and tear on the cars, budget for your replacement. And then is your employee driving their own car to conduct business for you? The question would be, are you responsible if they get in an accident? Absolutely you are, on top of their own insurance. So bottom line, it all falls to the business name. And one key coverage to think about if you have people driving for you is called hired non-owned auto, which protects the employee on top of their own personal policy limits. And most importantly, protects your company, whether the employees have insurance or inadequate insurance or not. Francine's going to talk a little bit about workers' compensation.
Workers' comp is short for what we call workers' compensation. It basically takes care of the injuries to the employees. It provides coverage for medical bills, lost payroll, and basically it just helps people when they're unable to work. So even if you only have one employee, the state of Indiana does require for you to carry workers' comp. As an owner, it's up to you on whether or not you choose to carry it, but sometimes your entity type or profession does require that you do have it. If you do or don't choose it, either way, you have to either include yourself or exclude yourself on the workers' compensation policy. There are cases where people choose not to carry one at all, and they can basically get what's called a workers' compensation clearance form. And that is done, or a workers' compensation exemption form. And that could be obtained through the Department of Revenue. Workers' comp is mandatory. So ask yourself, how can I control the costs? Ensure that you do the proper hiring and screening process. Make sure you have that in place. Train and retrain your employees on the policies, procedures, and talk to them about a safe working environment and make sure that they are practicing safe practices. Monitor claims if you do have claims to come in, and plan for on-site audits. Sometimes the workers' compensation company will come in, or the workers' comp company will come in, and they will look at your site. So plan for those audits. And there are times when a workers' comp company will do self-audits. They will give you the documentation so that you can do that. So when you do that, make sure that you complete that form. Otherwise, the company will assess charges for you or assess what they think you should have, and then you will pay additional money for it. And last but not least, whenever you have a contractor working for you, whether it's a subcontractor, whatever it is, make sure that you get their proof of insurance or clearance form, and then keep that information on file for a minimum of 7 years. Okay, next.
Can we advance the slide to the one that says directors and officers, please? There we go. We've covered a lot of the basics and probably the most obvious risks, but next week I'd like to discuss some equally important coverages that help you protect against risk. And those coverages can be pretty expensive ones without insurance for them. So the first one is directors and officers, and it's kind of like an errors and omissions policy for the board and the officers in the company. And so here on the screen are some questions to ask yourself. If you need directors and officers coverage and what could happen. I just want to mention that if someone sues you, the defense costs right now to get a suit dismissed are running between $20,000 and $50,000. Just you're innocent and just to get it dismissed. So the question is, can your business survive that type of financial loss? And what if they win? Next slide, please. So employment practices liability is sometimes, can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. Employment practices, sometimes called EPLI, protects against employers suing their, employees suing their employee. I still didn't get it right. Employees suing the employer, sorry about that. And you want to think about EEOC types of claims. Discrimination, wrongful termination, harassment, humiliation, those are big ones. And you might say, well, can an employee really sue me for anything? Absolutely they can. And yes, some attorney will take the case if they believe that it's good. You may think, well, I'm not negligent. Well, the burden of proof is on you. Did any of your managers or supervisors do something wrong or perceived as wrong or unwelcome? or even other employees causing comments and injury to their fellow employees can be cause for a lawsuit. Bottom line, the injury is in the eye of the beholder. Employees can bring a suit against you personally, their boss personally, and most likely the entire organization. So you want to ask yourself from a risk management standpoint, how do I defend myself? Start by having policies and procedures in place before something happens, before you start. Make sure those are all effectively communicated to all employees and subcontractors, and have everyone sign off that they understand, and then enforce those practices consistently. You can also create an environment that's not perceived as being hostile, is a safe place to express concerns, and is open for good communication. Last but not least, just like real estate, document, 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 and then buy an insurance policy. Next slide, please. Cyber liability is another coverage that's big right now, and we're seeing a lot of issues on that. So what does it cover? Breach of privacy. Did somebody hack into your system? Did they steal information? Did your client's information get compromised? It covers also liability. If someone else suffered financial loss because their information got out on your watch, that's where you have a liability issue. Believe it or not, kidnap and ransom. Just had an instance recently where one of our clients had $1.5 million ransom. It was actually negotiated down to $1.5 million to pay to release their information in the system. So that can be super expensive. What are your responsibilities? Notifying customers of a breach. You have to notify them in a particular legal fashion. State of Indiana says that you have to run credit scores twice for customers, and then you may have to pay for retribution and damages to make them whole again. The cost to you to notify clients legally and run credit scores, they're telling us that that costs about $250 per record, and that can add up really quickly. Ransom costs, I mentioned that exorbitant amount, but they tend to run between $5,000 and $500,000 normally. Most importantly, the reputation of your business and your clients' trust in you. How can you protect yourself? I'm going to sound like a broken record here too. Policies and procedures, safe passwords, and virus protection. Make sure everyone knows your policies and how to protect themselves. Next slide, please. Professional liability, several of us have talked around that today and a variety of different things, and it is something to consider. How do you know if you need it? Well, I'd say ask yourself some of these questions that are here. And then talk to your attorney, talk to your trusted insurance advisor, and see if they think that there's some professional liability that can be provided for you, especially if you have a product that's intangible or you're giving advice to someone. Next slide, please. Health insurance benefits. Do you have to offer coverage to your employees? That depends on your size, the number of employees that you have, the type of coverage that you need, and the current law. And that's changing all the time. So this is a really important area to make sure you have an insurance agent that understands this product, is licensed in it, and knows what they're doing. Consistency is definitely the key. Full-time versus part-time carries different rules. Different job levels carry different rules. So that's important to check on as well. And then what can you offer? Well, the standard ones are health, dental, life, vision, long-term care. But there are many, many others. And it's important to note too that maybe you can't afford to offer or aren't required to offer basic benefits, but you may have some other side benefits that you can offer that are at least good for your employees and maybe helping attract them to come to you. Next slide, please. So we're all about risk management here, and you should be too. And so what is it? It's basically pre-planning, looking at ongoing practices, and protecting against the inevitable with an insurance policy. A couple ways to think about that is to control the exposures in your building. Francine mentioned this too. Protect against things that cause a fire. Secure your building with locks and alarms. You want to make sure your premises is a safe place to visit or in which to work. Consider, is the lighting good? How about the condition of the sidewalks, the condition of the floors? How do I prevent slips and falls? Again, joining with Francine, make sure your product and service is as safe as possible. Identify things that could cause harm and prevent against them. Have your policies and procedures set up in advance. And I mentioned it before, but again, consistent application of those. Apply the same to everyone in your organization. Review them regularly and update them. Be vigilant. Your business is your largest asset and you worked hard to put it in place. Don't let it slip away because you haven't done some pre-planning. I want to mention too that you really should look at every year, making sure you evaluate this and see if your needs have changed for insurance. As you grow, definitely your needs will probably change. The time to prepare is not after something happens. It's to realize the need for insurance before something happens. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is you can't cover everything. You can't afford to cover everything. You need to sit back and decide your own risk of level of risk tolerance. What would keep you up at night, and what type of things would you want to protect against if you possibly can? We haven't mentioned this, but I'm sure Rose and Richard would jump on this too. Contracts that you sign may require coverages. Read them before you sign them. Once you've signed them, it's too late to know if you can provide it or what the cost would be. So have your attorney and your agent review them. One of my favorite little phrases is, I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV. And I think attorneys on today can maybe applaud that. But a good agent will know how to really look at a policy and make sure, or a contract rather, make sure you've got your coverages. Next slide, please. So bottom line, Francine and I would really like to thank you for having us today. We're pleased to be here. And both of us would say, here's our contact information. Any questions that you have anytime about insurance, or what's that policy I need, or what's risk management for me in this area, we both are more than happy to have that discussion with you. Thank you.
So thank you, Norma. Thank you, Francine. That conversation about insurance is so important because, you know, and you said something so profound. If someone falls in your office and is injured, you know, how will you handle that? You know, if something happens, and you never know you need insurance until you need it. So you may as well have it, you know, and as business owners, you think, well, I'll be okay. But you said something else that's so important at the very end of the presentation, is that a lot of times a person you're doing contracting with, they have insurance requirements. And so it's important for us as business owners to know what are the insurance requirements that are kind of necessary for our industry, what are standard for our industry, and not to be afraid of that, because all of our industries are different and have different kind of standards and requirements and things we have to protect ourselves and our clients with. So knowing that, working with the two of you all that are so knowledgeable can really make a difference, because a situation, it could really impact your company tremendously if you don't have the proper protections in place. So we have several questions in the chat. And so I think that what I'd like to do in the remaining time that we have is bring all of our presenters back into the conversation. And I'm just going to throw these questions out, and whoever can address them, please jump in and address them. And I encourage all of our attendees, please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them, as many of them as we possibly can. And I think I'm gonna put our presenters on the spot and ask them if there are any questions that we don't get to, that you all provide, that we share them with you to provide a response, that the Indiana Black Expo team can send out to everyone so that everyone can get their questions answered, because this is such a interesting and important topic. So I really would appreciate that from all of us. And so one of the questions that came through, very appropriate because of the environment that we're in right now. What if my employees work from home? What kind of insurance do I need?
That's a great question. I'll do that. First thing I would say is make sure that you have protection for them, like some sort of Wi-Fi connection that's safe and secure. Make sure that you have a VPN type of program in place. There's a lot of questions out about if somebody gets injured in their home, is work comp covered if they trip over their own things at home, and there can be coverage. For that, I'd say there's not any extra coverages that you need for someone working from home other than that protection. It's more important to protect that internet connection and those types of things. Your standard coverages should apply as they work at home.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add to that particular question? Okay, so let me ask you all something else that came into the chat. What are the pros and cons of being a corporate or a sole proprietor? And Richard, that may be to you.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, I'll jump in. So, and I'm sure Rose knows all this stuff too.
Yeah.
But the pros and cons, depends on the business. So there are simply different steps associated with both. And so they said sole proprietor. Sole proprietor is when you don't go through the formalities of creating a separately existing business. It's yours, it's under your name. You operate under your name. You can even use a doing business as, but you are still just that individual. One of the pros is the flexibility because it's just you and you haven't gone through all the formalities. One of the negatives is the fact that, as we talked about, that separate liability, establishing that with a different business is that if you are a sole proprietor, there's no wall, there's no distinction between you and your business. So if something were to happen and someone goes after you on the litigation side, is that you would be personally responsible because you are not a separate business.
Rose, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Richard really covered it. I would say having that legal structure really does give you a high level of protection. So it and for maybe tax purposes, I know the insurance friends on here that it's you should think about it for your tax purposes as well. How can you separate your own personal activities from the work? And when you have a business, it's when you have the separate legal identity, it becomes just a little bit easier to track your activities that way.
Rose, I'm going to stay with you for this next question because someone wants to know, is there a statute of limitations or an expiration date on an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement?
No, there isn't in the agreement itself. So in the agreement is you would put a time limit. If you like, some agreements will have like 5 years. I wouldn't say it's sort of arbitrary what you will decide, depend on the type of information. You could say, you know what, if I'm filing a patent application, right now I'm still drafting it, I'm preparing, I file it, and all of that information is not public yet. And so maybe it'll take me 2 years to file it. So I will anticipate in 3 years, my application would have published and now it's public. That information I was trying to not disclose before, there's no longer a need to keep it private. And so I would say, 3 years. And after the 3 years, that information is no longer proprietary, it's no longer non-public. And so we could put it 3 years. So that's the general way you think about it. How do you look at the type of information? Will it become at some point public? And would you still have the concerns 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now?
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. This question is actually directed to Norma and Francine. Do you need insurance for the influence that your intellectual property has on other people?
That's a question. Francine, do you want to start, or I can if you don't want to?
Go ahead. I'll let you.
Okay.
I'll let you start off with it.
All right. So yes, I mean, some of that would be in your in the product coverage and those types of things where that liability would come. But you can also buy patent insurance. You can also buy copyright infringement insurance. That sometimes is the third party, the reverse of that situation, where you're being protected to make sure that you aren't infringing on someone else's rights in that regard. So that's the type of insurance that you can specifically buy for that. But to protect yourself, the general liability and sometimes the directors and officers coverage can also come into play on those types of situations. So that's why that coverage is equally important.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I would echo that for the, from the intellectual property attorney perspective. That's what we look to when we're looking for whether you if we get an indemnification, you're going to protect me from IP infringement. We look to see what type of insurance you have, and that's what described. But Francine, sorry, you go ahead, please.
No, and actually I was going to say too, even the directors and officers part of it to protect them. So Norma actually hit the whole thing. So thanks, Norma.
I'm going to stay with you both again because we've got another insurance question. I'm in farming and contract out for transportation and marketing of produce. What is the best insurance I need?
Most insurance companies have different types of coverages or different types of industries that they cover. So definitely talk to the insurance company and see, because there's two different things. You talk about the transportation of it as well as the farming part. And then you also talk about the product itself. And talk to an insurance company to see exactly what, let them know everything that you have. And then they'll take a look at their companies and see which one will fit all three of them. Because once again, you have your transportation, your cargo, as well as spoilage of the product and items like that. Norma, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, that was great advice, Francine. And I would also add to that, we mentioned that a lot of industries are super specialized. Mm-hmm. There are carriers that are very specifically designed for this. And what they have is they'll built in to the policies very specific coverages you wouldn't even think of needing. A lot of it in the agricultural side depends on, are you growing it yourself? Who's your distributor? What kind of insurance do they have? And you want to look at, if you're buying it from other vendors, you want to make sure that they've got you protected on their policy as well. That you're making sure that they name you as an additional insured, as there's actually coverage called vendor coverage. And you can do that, as well as if you're growing it yourself, there can be some germination issues and those types of things. And there's coverages to protect for that. So, and then your normal product coverage is going to cover if someone ingests something and there's a damage to their tooth or they get sick from it or whatever. So a couple things that I would add.
So we've talked a little bit about, thank you ladies very much. Thank you. So we've talked a bit about the differences between the sole proprietor and the LLC, but several people have asked, what are the pros and cons of either of them? So can you all expound a little bit on the pros and cons of either pursuing the LLC or going with the sole proprietorship?
I'll step back in. And so there are a lot of different factors. So when somebody is considering sole proprietor, and then you mentioned in this instance the LLCs, the limited liability companies, is that similar to sole proprietor versus corporation, is that you have to look at the creation. So it's a weighing, is so that, I wouldn't say there's a one size fits all for anybody. The pro, again, for sole proprietor is that you don't file anything. You are automatically in business when you go out there and you start selling whatever, who you are, whatever you have as an individual. It's easier. It's the simple way, and it's the startup. So it can be, the sole proprietor can be considered the entryway into businesses that a lot of people take. The negatives, again, are on the financial side, both on the litigation side, and then also as Rose had indicated too, is on the tax side, is that it's just you. Anything, your losses, your gains are going to flow through to you as an individual. Now, one of the things I always say, as Norma mentioned, is that I'm not an accountant, and I make certain that I tell people that I do not give accounting advice. I suggest that you speak with a CPA. However, that's something that can be considered, because if you're an individual, if you're a sole proprietor, all your liabilities and your business income stays with you. One of the benefits of the limited liability company, though, is that those, if set up correctly, is that those liabilities can be set up to either stay with the company, or they can be considered to flow through to you individually on the tax end, while still keeping that protection for yourself and for your business, if it's set up correctly, from any type of legal liabilities. So if there were a lawsuit against your limited liability company, once again, if it's set up correctly, is those liabilities should stay with the company as opposed to opening up and you being personally liable.
Exactly.
May I, I have a question for Richard, actually. So I guess as a entrepreneur in the business, I would want to know, in terms of because I think cost is a lot of the times the issue, but because they might think, oh, I need to get a lawyer if I'm going to be an LLC. What do you say worth cost? Would you advise, because a few times you said, depending on how you structure it, your LLC, would you recommend or suggest that people use one of the forms? There are forms available online to file. You can do forms. Is that something you would advise, or is there a way that if someone maybe out of cost concerns did a form, and then they need to change it later? What are your thoughts on cost savings ways of wanting to have the LLC protection, but not having enough money to pay for a lawyer to get all your documents or your incorporation documents filed?
It's a wonderful question. I typically will suggest that people at least sit down with an attorney and find out what those costs are. Because a lot of people believe, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to use an attorney to do this because they're just going to cost so much. And the reason that I say that is because if you go online and if you're diligent and you go through some of the information that's on the Secretary of State's on IndyBiz, you can go through and do things correctly. If you go to some other sites, though, is that you run the risk of pulling down forms and using just some forms that you find on the internet that may not actually be what you need, or may in fact even be incorrect. So there is always that element of danger when you decide to do it yourself. Will you save money? Absolutely. Will you take some risks? Absolutely. So you could go, I do know people that have done that they've done it themselves, and that they've come to me later on after business is up and say, okay, take a look, let me know, did I do everything right? And so I can look at it at that time. So my advice is, if you can talk to an attorney, yes. If you feel confident in moving forward to try to save money, I don't necessarily recommend that as a first line of attack, but people have done that.
Thank you. So we've got so many questions in the chat, so we're only going to be able to get through to a couple of them in the last few minutes that we have. So I want to try and get as many as I can in the next couple of minutes. One of the questions that's in the chat is, my employees are seamstresses working from home. Do I need an insurance policy in case they are injured at home with their sewing machines or scissors?
Absolutely, you do. If you have an employee, you need workers' compensation coverage. The government doesn't really care where that is or not. So absolutely, you do need that.
Thank you. Another question that's in the Q&A is insurance and owner's draw versus salary. How does that work, and what entities are required to have workman's comp? I think we've kind of covered the workman's comp, but you want to touch back on that again?
Yeah, Francine, do you want me to do that, or you want
and let me make sure I understand you. You said what entities are required to carry workers' comp?
Yes, that's the question.
Okay. Definitely if you are incorporated. If you're LLC, you can choose to or not to. And then if you have an employees, you have to have workers' comp.
And how that works for owners can, the ones who can determine to be covered or not. Structure really. If you determine to be covered and you're taking a draw at the end of the policy period or at the end of your fiscal year, the government has you put in a minimum amount of payroll, and that's around 40,000 for you, regardless of whether you're getting that money or not, because they against something. So that's how that works.
Okay. Another question in the Q&A, can you accept donations as a sole proprietor? I want to give free information, but allow my followers to donate to keep the business going.
Okay, so go ahead, Rose. Any thoughts?
No, you go ahead. I chuckle because it's thought with peril, but no, you go ahead.
Yeah. See
Yeah.
there.
So before you answer that question, I just want to make a comment. I just want us all to remember as entrepreneurs, we go into business because, yes, we want to save the world, but we have to make money, and if we're not profitable, then it's a hobby. So you should decide, is this a business or is it a hobby? And there's nothing wrong with deciding that it's a hobby and going down that route and seeking advice and putting together the infrastructure to allow you to keep it as a hobby and have a little more flexibility in how you operate. But if it's a business, it's a different structure and mindset and thought process you have to bring to the table, because we don't go into business to give our services away. We want to be compensated and compensated appropriately for the services we bring to the table. So with that said, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I mean, as Rose mentioned, just a lot of the red flags just start popping up with the entire concept. We know that you want to make money, as Denise said, and that's an important point. If you're in business, if it's a hobby, make it a hobby. But if you're doing it to actually sustain it and keep moving forward, you have to structure it so that it does make money and that it can be sustained. However, by opening the door to various donors, is that at some point they could, depend on, again, unless you have it structured correctly, they could say, okay, this is a donation, so I'm expecting something in return, and that something in return could be in the form of saying, I donated, so I am now a part of your business, and so what's my percentage of ownership in your business? And so you just need to be careful if you are particularly online and soliciting donations from individuals. Just a lot of red flags there. You would have to structure, and you'd have to, I suggest, having specific language that you would have out there that they would need to acknowledge before you would accept their donation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Denise, your point was spot on. Like if you work from that place, then it answers the remainder. But it's this thing that, remember, the donations are income, right? If you are a business and you received whatever money you receive, it is income. So so from that, please go with Denise's perspective. That is the mindset you have to enter it with.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I just don't want anybody to get tripped up. Let me ask you all, what insurance will be best for someone, a single employee or owner that's working from home but preparing goods that are shipped out?
So definitely general liability. And when you say preparing goods that would be shipped out, let me come back to that, because it depends on if people come to your home or not.
Okay.
Definitely if they do. And then general liability, preparing goods to be shipped out, product liability. Are they making the product, or are they getting the product for someone else and relabeling it? So once again, it depends on their particular situation on what types of coverage that they do need to carry, and talk to the agent about it.
Yeah, I think the best thing, I'm sorry, Norma.
I just say that's excellent, Francine. I think the other things too is you're shipping goods that you've purchased or prepared to ship out. You want to protect those as they're going from point A to point B. So
Absolutely.
you might about transit coverage, or even if you're shipping them on common carrier, look at that contract, because usually that's pennies on the dollar. It's not very protected. You need your own coverage.
So there's a few more questions in the chat, but I know we've run a bit over time. So I'm going to have to end this conversation, as much as I hate to, because it's so great. But I think that hearing from Rose and Norma and Francine and Richard, it really stresses the importance of working with someone who's an expert in that field to help you with your IP, your infrastructure, your insurance needs, and not just trying to wing it, if you will. We do what we do as entrepreneurs because that's what we specialize in, and that's what we do well. We seek outside assistance so that we can do the best at what we do the best at doing. So get the help that you need. It's worth the cost because a lawsuit will be far more expensive than the money you'll pay an attorney to keep you from being sued. So the benefit really outweighs the risk. So that being said, thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone that joined us this afternoon. That does conclude our session for today. So Rose, Richard, Norma, Francine, thank you. And I encourage everyone to visit the Minority Business Series webpage at indianablackexpo.com for additional information and also resources that will help you with your businesses. So good luck, everyone, and have a great day and make lots of money.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, man, are we still around?
Oh my gosh, Denise, what a great job you did of moderating everything.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
you
good
guys
job.
are so great.
Yeah.
Unmute and start my video. Hey, oh, unable to start video. Can I start my, oh, that's not me. So you guys were great. Thank you.
Yep.
So, all righty. So I guess that's it.